This is a Wild Age Production podcast.
Welcome to the D&D world.
Meet you by the art room door, in a circle on the hallway floor. I made up a new map last night. It's got a dragon and a wizard fight.
Okay, so Red Mask of Death is it's not necessarily a siege, but it takes place in I think it's in England. It takes place in a kingdom, at least, that is beset by plague. And all of the so spoiler alert here, for a 150-year-old poem, I guess. The nobles in the kingdom all sequester themselves into a castle, and they spend that time telling stories with one another. No, sorry, not stories. It's a ball. They're having like a masquerade ball. I was thinking Canterbury Tales for a second. And then death gets in. And I think that would be a really interesting D&D, like, one setup to be like, maybe your poor adventurers have done enough where they won the lottery to, like, be invited to the masquerade ball while you wait out the siege. Or plague. You could still just use plague, I guess. And then 2, it's like a murder mystery, except it's a supernatural murder mystery. I don't know. Like, I feel like that's a really cool, like, the villain is death, like the embodiment of death. That would be a dope adventure. I don't know, but I guess this isn't the Edgar Allan Poe podcast. It's actually the Save or Die podcast, a podcast about classic Dungeons and Dragons. I'm one of your hosts, Crispy, an evil acolyte of a god of chaos who has, unknowing to you, led you into the caves of chaos and is about to betray you.
And I'm Carl. I am Lamunda the Lovely, and I have a dagger in my girdle.
And I'm Courtney, and I'm a unicorn who's fierce and elusive.
We are joined by Zach from the Zenopus Archives today. Thank you so much for joining us, Zach.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
And it's fitting that we have Zach on the show today because on this episode, we're going to be talking about something he maybe knows like a couple things about.
I've heard of it.
I think it's... I've never read this book before. Is it Holmes? Holmes? Holme? Holmeses?
Just pouring some out for my homies. Holmes Basic Dungeons and Dragons.
But before we get into that, Carl, what have you been doing in gaming lately?
Well, as I've talked about on the show before, I run a homeschool gaming group. I homeschool my kids, and we get together at a local game store and play board games and some Dungeons and Dragons. And the last time we got together and played Dungeons and Dragons, I did something that I was actually inspired from a game that Courtney and I played in at GaryCon. At GaryCon, we played in a game with Tim Kask, and he had this conceit that once something was accomplished, a portal would open up and we would go into the next area, and we'd have to accomplish the task in that area, and then another portal would open up and we would go into that area. And it was all improv because we wrote down words that he would use in his game. Now, I didn't do that exactly. What I did instead, with having these kids all trying out Dungeons and Dragons and being relatively new to it, I had them DM a room in a dungeon, and then when we got through that room, a portal would open up at a certain time limit. I'd set a 10-minute timer, and it would suck us up into a portal and put us in another room, and someone else would take a turn DMing. And it gave them kind of an out, because if whatever, the room wasn't going well or whatever, just wasn't working out for them, they wanted to be done DMing, they can say, okay, portals open up and you go through and someone else takes over. But to it also, none of them were really wanting to try to DM except for my son, Connor. and he actually set the ball rolling. He DM'd one, and they saw, well, okay, that I could do that, and so someone else tried it, and then someone else tried it, and then they came back the next week. We meet once a week, and they all were ready to start DMing their room. So it was just really cool to see their them getting comfortable with this idea of running a game.
Yeah, that's really awesome. That's really cool. I'm glad that game's still going. Courtney, what about you? What have you been doing?
We have been playing quite a bit of Dragon Strike around our house, in small increments due to attention spans. But the kids have
And
gotten
also
into
your
it.
VCR.
Well, the cartoon on, I think we watched it on YouTube, and the kids liked it, and Carl broke out our Dragon Strike game, and we played with them, and they had a great time with it. So, flipping over the different maps, playing it that way. So it's been lots of fun.
What's been hilarious, Crispy, about the whole thing is Connor, at 6 years old, has become so engrossed in this video that he has basically ran us through the adventure on the video, repeating the quotes from the Dungeon Master from the video, which is adorable, which is fantastic. And then he'll look at us expectingly like, okay, now you say your thing. You say what?
Yeah, we have to say the line from the movie, or from the show.
So Carnal will be like, dexterity die? And
No, he'll like,
then wait for you to know, which one's that? So he can go, it's the blue one. I low-key love Dragon Strike. The DM, I wish he was my dad. Like that guy is like the DM I aspire to be.
there's a quote from the movie where the elf says, "Stop your petty human bickering." And my son has been saying this, misquoting it, "Stop your human peckering."
Oh. we might have to censor that. This is a family show. Connor.
Goodness gracious.
I have not done a lot of D&D for jumping to me. I've not done a lot of D&D lately, but I did buy a copy of Into the Borderlands last night. I found it at a local game store, and other than that, I've been crushing it in Magic lately. That's been like top 8ing like all kinds of different local events. It's been great. I do want to get the X2 game going again. I would like to finish that at least, but I am moving soon, so I don't know when that's going to happen. Zach, what have you been doing in gaming?
Well, back in March, I went to GaryCon, and I was lucky enough to play in Carl's Discos and Dragons game. I just dropped in for a little while, but I was able to meet Zenopus, his version. That was awesome.
Man, that was nerve-wracking. It was nerve-wracking. I couldn't imagine. Like, so I set up Zenopus Tower during that game, thinking they may go to it. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And then they happened to go to it right around the time that Zach had sat down to join us. So I was like, oh, goodness. Oh, no. I got to run Zenopus for Zenopus.
It was awesome.
I'm glad to hear it.
I have a local group also that I'm part of, and so we generally play about every other week. We have two different regular games going on there. There's a Menzo Branson game, the City of the Drow, where we're all surface dwellers that have been captured and working our way up the ranks of the Drow society. Mostly by fighting.
I know it's wrong, but okay, so Zach, you have to know something about me. From ages like 15 to 23, I was a huge like Legend of Drizzt fan. Like I read all of them and had all of them in hardback, and I did that terrible nerd thing that people do when you said Menzo Branson, where I went, it's actually pronounced Menzo Branson, and I just need you to know that I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have no idea how it's correctly pronounced.
Well, it's
I mean, even our Dungeon Master doesn't
which
really
I think
say it
is
very
dumb because I've also always said men's operanzen, but I had that weird visceral nerd reaction where it's like, I know a thing that you don't. So I'm sorry for being that kind of person.
And nobody would have known. Told us all.
One reason I enjoy it because I know almost nothing about the setting.
Do you have are you running the second edition box set?
Yes, that's what our Dungeon Master is using.
Yeah,
I'm just a player in it.
That's all you
And
need.
we also have a regular Stonehell game.
Oh, I own a copy of Stonehell. I've been wanting to run that.
So our DM in that, he's been running it for 10 years, and he uses it with different groups. He'll bring it to conventions. He's had different regular groups with it. And anybody can go into it, and they can change the dungeon, and then however it changes, it affects the next group.
Huh.
That's awesome.
That's super cool.
So Zach, are you usually a DM or usually a player?
I'm usually a player in the group of adults, and then I run games for my kids and their cousins periodically when we're all together. I'd like to do more DMing with our group, but we're sort of a group of DMs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's difficult. Do you do the mean girl thing that Carl and I do, where you judge everyone's DMing ability when you're in the game?
No, I'm just happy to have somebody else do the heavy lifting.
Do you guys get to play a lot of OSR games, or is it mostly obviously you're playing second edition or some iteration of that, but do you guys typically stick to old school games?
Well, the Stonehell game is old school.
Mm-hmm.
It's using BX. And the other one's second edition. And before that, we played in like a 7.5-year Temple of Elemental Evil campaign. That was mostly second edition. Mm-hmm. It's just based on the guys in the group, whatever they're used to running.
Okay. All right. So, shall we jump in to today's topic? Holmes Dungeons and Dragons, the original version of basic D&D.
That's what I'm here for.
Carl had some stuff.
Yeah, right off the bat, I want to talk about that. How it's, the thing about Holmes Basic to me is it's kind of the eye of the hurricane of Dungeons and Dragons, because it's right at this center where it is all of these things. It is a reorganization and simplification of OD&D. It is this first product entry concept into advanced D&D. And then on top of that, it sets the mold of what every basic D&D set going forward will be like. And that's just incredible to me that it's kind of this epicenter of all things Dungeons and Dragons lands right here in 1977 with the Holmes Basic box set.
Well said. I don't think I can put it better than that.
The other thing I find so great about Holmes Basic, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about it on the show, is I feel like in a lot of ways, John Eric Holmes is kind of the patron saint of the OSR. This is someone who was a fan that saw something they loved and wanted to be involved, and reiterated and simplified and restructured this thing that they loved so other people would have an easier time enjoying it.
So essentially what you're saying is that Holmes D&D is the first retro clone.
That is the argument I kind of just made. I think the spirit is the same. I think that drive is the same as somebody who, anybody who makes a game is making it because they want people to play it and enjoy it. But I think there's that spirit of just seeing this thing that they want other people to have an easier time enjoying, and taking steps to make that happen.
Yes. And he was really, I think, inspired by, there was a local group where he was that put out a earlier set of like their improved D&D called Warlock. And that was what he and his sons learned to play with, because the original rules were hard to understand. And I think he saw what they did, and that kind of inspired him to contact TSR. Mm-hmm. Because he saw that there could be an improvement to the rules, at least their clarity.
So I've owned Holmes basically since I started playing D&D. So for the whole time I've played D&D, I've owned Holmes. And I used to read it and reread it all the time. And I super loved it. It was my first basic game, and I haven't read it for a few years, and I just forgot how enjoyable of a read it is.
Oh, certainly, I agree. I mean, that's how I got all started.
So I know we had given the all new easy to master D&D a really high rating as like this is the best intro version to D&D. I don't know if that's true. I actually think Holmes is just a great introduction to the game.
I think where Holmes excels is that it gives you enough information to hit the ground running, but enough freedom to not be constrained by these kind of thoughts and ideas that are more solidified in later versions of the games. You know, obviously BX is more structured than Holmes, and then Beckby is more structured than BX, and so on and so on. Holmes still has a lot of that original D&D concept, where in BX you might say, this is my house rule for this, where in Holmes or OD&D you would say, this is how I handle this, because there isn't a rule to house rule. You just got to handle things the way you would handle them as a DM adjudicator.
Yeah, one big area is in combat. There's no real order of combat like there is in the later basics. It's just some guidance about how it should happen.
That really struck me by surprise rereading it, because I had always thought that there was a Holmes order of combat, and nope, it's not even there.
Yeah, he just mentions a few things like spells should go off first, but there's no real like it has to be this way. Like always do it in this order.
Yeah, it really does follow sort of like, all right, well, logically, if they're far enough away for you to shoot arrows at them, that's what you'll do, and then when they get close, you can't anymore. Because you might hit your buddy.
What if we all talked about, just real quickly, our experiences with Holmes Basic? Is that something we'd want to do?
Yeah.
Sure.
Like games we've played?
Yeah, stuff like that.
Okay.
Is that cool?
It's fine. It requires me to remember things.
Well, I mean,
I remember playing in Zach's game, sitting next to Chris Holmes, which was awesome.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, that was epic.
That was a fun game. I played a dwarf.
We'll talk about that a little bit.
Crispy, why don't you start? Because you have kind of a...
I have the least experience with Holmes, I think, like actually playing it. Running it, really. So mine will be kind of short. I first found Holmes, it was 2002, I want to say. I'm pretty sure. And there was this used bookstore behind the apartment complex I lived in, and that's where I got all of my D&D stuff. I was basically buying anything with Dungeons and Dragons in the title. So, like, I had a very big mismatch. And I wouldn't actually run Holmes. I would read it and read it and read it. And I really liked it, and I loved all the weird, quirky art. Like, my favorite piece of art is the wizard who's coming around a corner running into, I think it's a group of kobolds?
I think they're supposed to be gnolls.
Are they gnolls? I guess it's not that big of an impression on me. But I didn't actually get to run it for like 6 years. And Holmes is actually that version, or that game that I ran Keep on the Borderlands for a bunch of friends. I finally peer pressured them into letting me run basic D&D after years. And we were playing Keep on the Borderlands, and combat was like just super boring because I don't know why. So I started narrating more like visceral combat, and that's stuck with me ever since. I also, this was my first time getting to run hirelings, and that was super fun. Like, I came up with like this list of grimdark hirelings that was like one of the best things I've ever done. Also was the genesis of me loving single D6 weapon damage.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I actually, so I knew about Holmes, and I was really big into the history of the game, and I was reading about it, but I had never really thought to run it or really dive deep into the book until listening to this show with former hosts who kind of harped on how great of a product it was. And that led me to Zach's blog and reading about it, and then just kind of cover to cover reading the book. And from there, now I run it at conventions with Discos and Dragons, which is just Holmes Basic and 70s dice and miniatures. And to me, just one of the most interesting products historically for the game. I mean, I don't know that your blog, Zach, could be about BX and be as rich and interesting as it is. Even though I like BX a whole lot, I think there's less historically interesting about BX than there is Holmes Basic.
I agree.
My experience with playing Holmes, besides Carl's Discos and Dragons game, is I played in a game that Zach ran called Return to Zenopus at North's RPG Con, sitting next to Chris Holmes, and it was basically we went back to the Towers of Zenopus years later, and kind of got to explore it and see what changes or if any changes had happened with the dungeon and the art itself. And it was a lot of fun and very interesting things that Zach kept and the things that he changed about the map and the dungeon exploration. So it was awesome. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you. So I started with Holmes Basic. It was my first D&D set. I got it in 1982, I think, for my birthday. Couldn't make heads or tails of it. I had the version that came with chits instead of dice. So they had these little pieces of paper that were numbered, 1 to 4, 1 to 6. And you were supposed to use those, pull them out of a bag or a cup instead of rolling dice. But I was young and I had no idea what to do with them. But, eventually I found a set of dice, learned how to play from some other kids, and quickly moved on to advanced D&D, which is what I played during most of the 80s. But I always remembered the basic set rulebook, especially the sample dungeon in the back, which I thought had a great story behind it, the intro part with the wizard Zenopus.
Mm-hmm.
So at some point in the 2000s, I found out that Holmes had actually written fiction, and I read his novel that he wrote, his D&D novel, The Maze of Peril, and I noticed that there were similarities between it and the sample dungeon, and that's sort of what got me started looking into his role in creating basic D&D, and eventually that led to starting the blog. So that's sort of my background and how I got started in all of this. It also got me back into playing D&D too, because I wasn't playing at the time. But I joined a local group, and then I've been with them now for like 9 years, I think.
Dang.
That's awesome.
So I have a quick question, because as Carl said, we did have a couple hosts previously who super love Holmes. They stick up for it all the time. They have kind of a similar memory where it was one of their, actually I think it's both of their first sets. And I don't know why I'm being so vague. It's the Stewarts. I don't know why.
Yes. I was previously on Saber Die with them.
Yeah, I don't people know who we're talking about. People listen to the show. So the Stewarts love Holmes, and I myself I like Holmes a lot, but it's not my preferred version. I don't think it doesn't do what I need, which would be a longer term game. So why Holmes? What has stuck with you for so long? Is it just a nostalgia thing? Is there something Holmes D&D is doing that other versions aren't?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I don't know. You kind of need an intro for whatever rule set you're starting with. So it's a good intro if you're using, I tend to fill in the higher levels with original D&D now. So if you're doing that, it's still a good intro for that because it's completely compatible with it.
What about you, Carl? Why Holmes for you?
Well, I pretty much the exact same answer. I consider, so like I said, Holmes is this epicenter, and it goes in all these different threads, and it's kind of the start of basic, and it's the beginning of advanced, introduction to advanced. It's the structure of later D&D products. But I do consider Holmes an OD&D product. And so the way I would use Holmes for a long-term game is sort of sitting that race as class, which is vastly my preference, system into OD&D, and then using OD&D to extrapolate and expand. Maybe just even the 3 little brown books in Holmes, and you can kind of work out the thief stuff if you need to without adding Greyhawk to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Carl, are you saying that Holmes has racist class?
I am saying he lays the groundwork for it to be more solidified later. I'm saying yes. I would use it in OD&D to provide that groundwork because it's my preferred style of play.
So I guess I don't see the other side of this argument that Holmes doesn't have racist class because it's obvious. what we know as races class, it does set the groundwork, and it's like, well, if you're reading this from like a more modern or like a later interpretation, it's definitely the same rules as races class for elves and dwarves and halflings. I know it says that they're fighters, and then it mentions that AD&D has special rules for thieves, like dwarven thieves. And
that's the thing that breaks the tie. Like, he gives this clue that, like, they don't have to be fighters. And he was really just following the original D&D rules, which only allowed dwarves and hobbits, as they were called then, to be fighters.
But my contention is that he specifically lays the groundwork that elves are both simultaneously, not in the OD&D interpretation where you choose between adventures.
Now in the manuscript, he had that a little bit different. So it was really that when TSR got it and they edited it, that they made it clear for the first time.
Oh, that's interesting.
What does it say in the manuscript, if you can paraphrase?
I have it here. Let me open it up.
That is handy. I was not expecting that. Or I was expecting you to
I have it here on my computer. Elves must decide before an adventure begins, however, whether they are going to act as a fighting man, in which case they can wear armor but cannot throw spells, or assume the role of a magic user, gaining the use of spells but forfeiting weapons other than the dagger. For each adventure, the elf can change his role, but once the adventure starts, he must not change.
That's very interesting.
Holmes was just presenting what he had read in the original D&D rules.
Another difference that keeps it from being completely racist class is dwarves do not have their own XP track. They level as fighters.
Yes.
So they're
all right, I guess.
You can see it both ways. So obviously, like, Holmes presenting it this way then is perhaps why, like, when Tom Moldvay went to work on the basic set, he was like, well, let's just take out any, idea that they can be anything other than just.
Well, I mean, there is a passage in Holmes that says that elves do operate as both simultaneously. It's like at the end of the set, at least in my copy. And I'm paraphrasing. I don't have the exact wording, but it's very close to that. It's not verbatim, but it's super close. That's interesting that initially they just worked like OD&D elves.
Yeah, when he prepared the manuscript, that was what he was going by, and just left that in there. And then, but I think at TSR they already had this idea that they were going to be like a double-classed character.
Yeah, I wonder if it's emulating the multi-class rules from AD&D that they were developing.
Oh, yeah. Well, some of that was already presented in Greyhawk, the Greyhawk supplement.
Okay, yeah.
So there were sort of two ideas already out there.
Do you know if in the manuscript, so this is getting real deep, this is a real deep dive, in the manuscript version, does it classify the adventure as a day? Because it seems from my reading, my interpretation of my reading is that an adventure is just a day. So it's not, it's not like a big quest. It's more an expedition into the adventure site. Because specifically in the magic user section, talking about spell books, when the magic user, quote, goes home for the day, that's when they can rememorize their spells. And so I wonder if in the manuscript version, if the interpretation of adventure is day to day.
Yeah, I don't think that magic spell section was changed very much. I can't remember for sure, but there may have been a few slight changes in that section, but I don't think it was changed significantly.
I think there is a certain amount of expectation with old school D&D, especially in the very early years, that you kind of got together with your buds and played D&D for a little bit, and at the end, no matter what conceit you had to make to get them there, they ended up back at the safe haven, whether it was a high level magic user wandering through the same dungeon and says, boom, I'll send you back, or whatever, just to get them where they needed to be. So it really wasn't something like, later D&D where you would keep track of each day and
then resting in a dungeon overnight becomes a thing, which I don't remember where I read this. It may be in OD&D itself, but there is like a conceit of like, oh, you don't rest in the dungeon. If you guys are done playing for that session, you somehow make it home and start in town. Maybe that's in a blog. I can't remember, but I know of that interpretation as well. I'm familiar.
Well, I believe that Gary Gygax always did that in his early games. He would always have them get back, so they didn't leave people in the dungeon from session to session, because they would have different players coming in each time.
Yeah.
Now, Holmes does in the later part of the rulebook, he does mention that you can suspend time and just stop wherever you are and then restart at that position in the dungeon.
Yeah,
he sort of presents it as an option, like in the part right before the example of play.
It's my least thing. It's my least favorite part of how D&D is played, where it's just like, I talk about this all the time. Everyone's on the world's longest camping trip. It bugs.
Although he's not actually talking about camping there. He's talking about just freezing time and just saying, okay,
picking
you're
up,
about to open that door. We'll continue that next time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is I think whether it's day or adventure for old school D&D kind of means the same thing.
Yeah. And that's what my initial question was, is in the manuscript, because Holmes very much, in the earlier parts of the book, details like an adventure as basically a day. It's like a day trip to the Caves of Chaos, and then you get your stuff and you finish and you go home for supper. The biggest limitation is that he says that the magic users cannot bring their spell books to the dungeon. Mm-hmm. So they're only going to have the spells for one day. Yeah, and then they go home, and then you can get resting done, for each full day at home, quote unquote. And I do believe it's literally in quotes in the book. You gain, 1 to 3. One thing that I liked in Holmes, just more things I observed, that I was like, this is real good. Was, and I've always used this as a house rule, but I know it's specifically not in BX, is that elves get the 1 in 2 chance to spot secret doors just by passing. And then when they're actively looking, they get a 1 to 4 in 6 chance to find them.
Oh, yeah.
I love that rule. I've always loved that rule. And when I was getting more into BX, I was like, why isn't this in here? It's really great.
Yeah, I actually forgot that it wasn't in the later basic rules until recently. I think we were playing our Stonehell game, I was looking at the rule book. Yeah, it's cool. You can also use it for other stuff too. Like if there's something that, besides a secret door, just give the elf a 1 in 2 chance of noticing it if there's something hidden in the room.
Yeah, I love that.
They mentioned doing that in the sample dungeon, rolling a 1 to 2 kind of a spot check, a perception check for an elf or a dwarf. And nobody else gets the chance, but the elf or dwarf may see something in the sample dungeon that the other ones don't.
Yeah, great point.
I want to ask about the chits, because I've always grown up where, game stores have a display of like Chessex dice and a display of loose dice where you can mix and match and annoy them by rolling them on the glass to see which ones are the best. But were the chits different color? How do you tell the chits apart? I've actually never seen Holmes chits.
I have a copy of the rulebook right here with chits in it, still attached. They were different colors, though. It's funny. They're kind of like the cover of the blue rulebook. Mm-hmm. They're black and white. There's 2 sets of 1 to 20. One set's white, one set's black, and then 1 to 8 are also black, and then the other ones are all shades of blue. Or one of the sets of 1 to 10 is gray. So it's sort of that same blue monochrome.
Yeah, because I guess in my head, I've always thought that you just put all of the chits in a Yahtzee cup and then take it out of there. It's like, well, what if you are rolling a d6 and you get a 20? That doesn't make any sense.
No, they're really unwieldy because you would need a separate cup really for each
one.
set.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember having mine all cut up in like a little plastic baggie, and it was, it's just a mess because if you did that, you had to sort them all out then before you started playing.
Yeah, I guess you could do multiple sandwich baggies and get some Rust-Oleum TM and spray paint them different colors. Like the bags, not the chits themselves.
The other thing that's kind of odd about the chits is they do not have markers on them for what is a 6 or a 9. There's no underline or dot at the bottom. So you have to flip it over to the back and know how it should line up with the information on the back, which shows you like a 1 through 4 or 1 through 6, depending on which chit you're pulling. And
you mean 1 through 10 or 1 through 20? Because there's not going to be a 9 on the 1 through 4.
Yeah, that's a good point, Courtney.
Counting is hard.
Yeah, exactly that. Well, I mean, but they're all aligned the same way. So 1 through 4 through 1 through 20, they determine the facing of the number on the other side. And that's the only way to tell the difference between a 6 and a 9 on the chits.
It must have sucked to play the D&D set without dice. How do you get anything done?
Yeah, when I actually learned how to play from these neighbors of mine, I don't even remember using dice. We just had characters, and the DM was just like, basically narrating a story, and then we were making choices and stuff like that.
Yeah, I have the same thing. When I was first learning how to play D&D, there was no such thing as a D20. We did everything on 2D6. And, it was just like yeah, that's probably high enough to do it. You succeed. It was very much done by feel, which I miss, actually. That was the best way to play D&D. So now we've covered chits. I don't like saying that word. I don't know why. It's
a little bit awkward.
Right.
So,
yeah. I started a hashtag on Twitter recently called Chitstorm.
Oh my goodness.
I know, Carl, you kind of provided us with some notes here.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about just some of the weird rules that are in Holmes and nowhere else that don't really appear in later versions or earlier versions of the game, but for some reason they land squarely in Holmes.
Here's one that is automatically disqualified. The great weapon versus dagger rule.
Oh, yeah.
Because that does exist. I know we've talked about this before, but that's actually it has to do with weapon classes from chainmail. So everyone asks us about,
what do you guys think? Isn't it weird that if you have a greatsword, you only get to attack once every other turn, but a dagger would go 4 times by that time, so why would you choose any other weapon? And it's disqualified. It's a weird holdover from chainmail.
Well, and actually, when I talked to Chris Holmes about this rule, he said that they developed their own house rules for what the dagger does versus what a great weapon would do, and the great weapon in their game actually does 3d6 of damage, which is a lot. But that would kind of explain why it has that slower rate of fire. So it may have its origins in there. The 3d6 for damage probably has its origins in Greyhawk damage versus large creatures. So,
possibly there's also the Warlock supplement that I mentioned earlier that was developed at Caltech. All the weapons in there did D6, but they would use multiple D6 for the larger weapons. So Holmes may have gotten that from there. It's sort of complicated because there's stuff from chainmail about where the weapons can get multiple blows based on their weapon length, and then there's the Greyhawk variable weapon damage, and then there's the Warlock supplement, and I'm not sure which exactly Holmes was drawing on. And then there's also what he had in the manuscript is different from what was actually published. In the manuscript, he actually had all regular weapons, like longswords, getting 2 attacks per round.
Oh, wow.
Interesting.
And it wasn't just daggers, it was swords too. And his example of combat actually shows that very clearly. In the manuscript
or in the whole... Okay, so not
in the manuscript. And then TSR went and edited it, and while they were doing that, they changed it to the famous, the daggers get 2 attacks per round. So his version was still not balanced because the 2-handed weapons only got 1 attack per round.
Yeah, but if I could do 18 damage with that 1 attack, I'm okay with that.
Well, yeah, except that that wasn't mentioned in the rulebook or
Yeah.
in the manuscript.
So the plot thickens, I guess. But I don't know. I feel like that's the easy weird rules variation that you could call upon.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like everyone knows about it. Like
It's easy a rule to ignore. It's like one sentence in there. So just pretend it doesn't exist.
One thing that I don't know, this one I think is by now also kind of Bush League trivia is the rules for magic missile, where you actually have to roll. It's literally a magic missile, so like an arrow. You roll, to hit, and it does a d6 plus 1, like a magic arrow.
Yes. Yeah, optionally you can give it a +1 to hit if that's how you interpret it to be like a magic arrow. Yeah, this is the only rule set where it really clearly says that. Now, Tim Kask has said that that's how they played in original D&D, but the original D&D rules aren't really clear that a 2-hit roll is required. Yeah. There's some evidence in some other, like the Monster Manual mentions that a magic missile like striking at +2, so that would imply that was a roll required.
Mm-hmm.
But Holmes is really the only rule set where we have that actually written down, like definitely do it this way.
Yeah. Well, in later versions, there was a topic on Dragon's Foot about this recent-ishly, where people are like, oh, hey, why is there a duration next to Magic Missile? Why does it last for a turn? And so people had discussed that, where it's like, oh no, it like creates a Magic Missile. It doesn't fire right away. You get to fire it off whenever you choose. So you can cast it, then go into battle and use it.
Yeah, that's a cool way to work with that.
Yeah.
In Holmes, there's no duration listed.
Yeah, there is no duration, which I think is interesting. What are some other Carl? What are some other cool, weird rules variations?
I believe it's the only rule set that has the presence of the parry.
It might be in Greyhawk as well, but for the basic rules, yes.
Yeah, there's a parry in Chainmail, which is probably where he got the idea from.
Got it. Okay.
But there's no D20 roll in Chainmail, so he had to come up with a way to implement that. So he gives like a -2, I believe, if you say you're going to parry for your opponent to hit you. And then the coolest thing is that like if they get the exact number to hit, then their weapon breaks instead of hitting you.
Mm-hmm.
No, the parrying weapon breaks. I always get that backwards. So you don't take damage, but you lose your weapon.
Okay, yeah. I have been reading that correctly then. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, their weapon breaks? But I had previously always read it as your weapon breaks.
Yeah, no, it says that very clearly.
I don't know how I feel about that rule. I don't know. I like it. I think it's an interesting concept. I don't know if I like the execution. What was another one? Oh, I didn't get a chance to fact check this, and Carl, you might be able to help me out. But the rules for dancing lights was that it specifically mimics the torches of an adventuring party. I don't remember ever reading that in Dancing Lights before, but I may be wrong. And I don't have my copy of BX Essentials or BX handy.
I think it's something that changed. I think that's pretty similar to the OD&D spell.
Yeah, you can send them like 120 feet ahead, so you can like, it could be a trap. For if you were going to ambush somebody, you could send them ahead so they thought like somebody was coming.
Yeah, same with auditory hallucination, which is not something I've ever seen in another version of D&D that I can recall. And the amount of noise you can make is based on your level. Yeah.
Now, that's one of the new spells, I believe, that was added by Gygax. So there were a few spells that made their debut in Holmes Basic. They weren't in OD&D. They weren't in the Greyhawk supplement. And then Holmes didn't have them in the manuscript, but when Gygax was fixing it up, he added a few of the new spells that he was coming up with for advanced D&D. They generally have longer descriptions, but they're not always the same as what actually appeared then in the player's handbook. So they may have come from an intermediate version.
Huh. Interesting. Any other examples you can give us for those?
Enlargement was a new spell. Ray of Enfeeblement was a new one.
Oh, I didn't know Ray of Enfeeblement made its debut in Holmes. Weird rule variant. It's something that exists in other versions. I thought it was interesting that there's different scales for ability score cash-ins. So you can, depending on your prime requisite or the stat that you're wanting to trade into, it's either a 2-to-1 or a 3-to-1 trade-in. So, like, wizards can get more intelligence, but it's at a higher cost. And, fighters and clerics can get higher strength or wisdom at a lower cost. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I believe those are directly from the original booklets.
I believe they simplify it later in BX to be just a 2-to-1.
I think it's pretty similar. The OD&D stating of it is kind of confusing, and it's so confusing that it would be easy enough to not think it's there, because it says it in a way that doesn't seem like you're actually changing the stats. It almost says like you can use wisdom for strength on a 2-to-1 basis or something, and it sounds almost like you're rolling against stats that you're not rolling against. It's really bizarrely stated.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, if you read that in the original booklet, it looks like you're just doing it in order to get the XP bonus, but not actually changing the stat. Whereas Holmes left that out, so it in Holmes it's like you're actually changing the stat, which then they carried forward into BX, I believe.
Yeah, it's in BX for sure.
So he was sort of responsible for dropping out that part. Because even in the Greyhawk supplement, like when it introduces all those new strength bonuses, it says it must be the raw strength score, not the adjusted score. You're not going to get that 1800 strength if you up your strength by lowering your intelligence.
Recently was my first time to read through all of Holmes. I am, as most of you guys know, typically a player and not a DM, so I just play whatever version other people want to DM for me. So I read through the whole Holmes book, and in it has a list of monsters. And so I was want to talk about our favorite monsters in the Holmes book. And my favorite monster in the Holmes book is the Black Pudding. Who doesn't want to fight Black Pudding?
Delicious.
I know. Like, I feel like maybe he was just like eating some chocolate pudding and was like, this could be a monster. So I also think it's hilarious that the Black Pudding is always hungry. So anyways, I've never played in a game where I've had to fight Black Pudding.
Yeah, I think they're underused because they have such high hit dice.
Yeah, there's actually one in the Discos and Dragons game that nobody's ever got to.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff in the Discos and Dragons game that nobody's ever got to. I think the Black Pudding, I mean, maybe I'm assuming here, but I would imagine it's kind of based on The Blob, the old 50s movie.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, in the description, it's referred to as a blob, so.
Oh, yeah. Hey, look at that. I'll say this about the monster section, and there's very little to know, and in the entirety of Holmes, there's very little to know masking the Tolkien influence on Dungeons and Dragons. So, like, when it talks about the wight, it says barrow wights, as per Tolkien, are nasty, nearly immaterial creatures. And there's even a section in Holmes where it says the imaginary universe of Dungeons and Dragons obviously lies not too far from the Middle-earth of J.R.R. Tolkien's great Lord of the Rings trilogy. So it's
that's
interesting.
And Holmes wrote that.
Yeah, I believe
put
it.
that in there. Gygax didn't take it out because at this point this was before they took the Tolkien references out of the earlier books. So the Holmes Basic Rulebook was the last one where they had those Tolkien references in there. And
what is it, up to the third printing where they still have halflings and listed as hobbits?
In original D&D or
in Holmes?
In Holmes, I think in the second printing they took out some of them, and then they're mostly out by the third printing. And then there's a second edition. There was always one stray reference to a hobbit in there. So Although in Holmes, all they did was change Halfling to Hobbit. They didn't take out the other Tolkien references. There's still a reference, like Carl mentioned.
Yeah, to the whites as barrel whites.
Yes, that was never taken out. There's 2 references to Balrogs that were never taken out.
Yeah, and Wraith.
Whereas when they went to the original D&D books, they were more careful and they took out most of the references, like all of the references to Balrogs and etc. So somehow Holmes kept in some of these things. So when I read this when I was a kid, I saw Tolkien references in there.
Yeah, and there's also in the Spectre, it talks about the Nazgul of Tolkien fall into this category. So yeah, there's a lot of Tolkien in the monster list and in the whole book, but in the monster list. But as far as like my favorite monster from the Holmes book, I think it's obviously these are monsters that kind of repeat, but just the monster list as a whole, I feel like it is exactly what I want from a D&D monster list. It is so complete and full of options for Dungeons and Dragons without kind of losing the plot with some of the more out there, more Barosian monsters I don't typically use in my Dungeons and Dragons game, which is funny to say because there's plenty of reason to, but I mean it's just not something that I've done personally. So I don't miss stuff like Neanderthals and rock baboons and giant shrews that don't really make
white apes,
right? That don't appear in Holmes, that do appear in later versions of basic D&D.
I didn't know we were gonna do this, so when I was reading, I skipped over the monster section because I was like, it's monsters. I've read a D&D book before, so Zach, how about you? What's your favorite monster?
The purple worm.
Oh yeah, I thought it was interesting that in the in one of the examples of play that he did bring up the purple worm, and I was like, this only goes to the 3rd level.
Yeah, and sometimes people complain about that as if it's a flaw in the basic rules that only go to 3rd level, that he has these monsters in there. But he wrote about this a little bit in some of the articles that he wrote about working on the game. He wanted to preserve the flavor of the original game, so he was trying to show all of the interesting monsters that had been included. And then he also, he kept dragons in there because it's in the name of the game. You can't really have Dungeons and Dragons and not have dragons. Mm-hmm. So even though they're, for the most part, out of the range of 1st to 3rd level characters, so you could include one that was younger, perhaps.
So is it the same types in his manuscript? Is it white, black, red, and brass in the manuscript?
There's one difference, I believe. I think the brass dragon.
Interesting. Yeah, I think including high level monsters in low level dungeons can be a lot of fun, and it just becomes the part of that dungeon with that monster is the part you avoid or try to get around, and that becomes part of the puzzle. You can't fight your way through this, but can you figure out a way to avoid it or a way to possibly even use it to your advantage? In his book in Maze of Peril, there is a purple worm.
Yeah, and that was on the 1st level of the dungeon,
right?
And that was based on an actual dungeon that he ran, and it had the purple worm there.
Huh.
Now, Holmes actually addresses the idea of the high level monster in the intro to the monster section. He must have anticipated this.
This 40-year later
conversation.
He was a smart guy.
Absolutely.
So what he wrote here is if one wanted to use a red dragon, for instance, in a campaign with low level characters, the dragon could be scaled down. So that's pretty easy. Maybe it ran into a high level magic user and it was partially shrunk by a magic spell, reducing its hit points. Or there might be a magic sword effective only against this dragon hidden in the dungeon, and adventurers are given a hint or legend that might lead them to it. But then he writes it should have less treasure. I don't know how many D&D dungeon masters actually took that advice, though.
That's a cool idea, though, of it just being a angry shrunk dragon. I like that idea.
Yeah.
As opposed to like a baby dragon, because there's nothing cool about fighting a baby dragon, but a really mean shrunk dragon with a Napoleon complex sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah. And then when they published that section, they changed the dragon to a chimera. I don't know why.
Oh yeah, if wanted to use a chimera, for instance. Interesting.
That is interesting.
I guess TSR didn't want their dragons shrunk down.
I think it probably got changed because there are rules within the rule book for scaling dragons, already. Dragons do come in different sizes, so it probably got changed to Chimera just to not have this kind of double mechanic presented for doing that. And then I think the last thing I have here to talk about is the sample dungeon, which I think warrants lots of discussion.
Oh, yeah. That's my favorite part of the rulebook.
I've owned this book for like 16 years, never read the sample dungeon.
Even now? You've still not read it?
I skipped it for today. I was trying to get all the nitty-gritty little rules pieces. It's sample dungeon. It's fine.
So if you skipped the sample dungeon and the monsters, what did you read?
I read the rules and the spells and character creation and the equipment and adventuring. Funny enough, Holmes is the first edition where they scaled down the movement speed because originally in D&D, in original D&D, you make 2 movements at 120 feet per turn.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're missing out. Yeah. You should read the sample dungeon.
I figured you would run the sample dungeon for the AP part. That was my anticipation. So I was like, I don't want to spoil this for myself.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the sample dungeon. The Holmes Basic, like many of the basic D&D products, and from here on out, D&D products have had sample dungeons that have come with them. And I would say Holmes is possibly the most robust of any of them.
I would agree. The intro to it is almost like a pastiche of a Lovecraft or Howard story.
Mm-hmm.
Holmes was a big fan of. He'd been reading Lovecraft since he was a teenager in the 1940s, and he read all sorts of stories in pulp magazines at that time. So the background here is almost drawn from typical kind of story involving a mysterious wizard. And it really, it sets the stage for the sample dungeon. Just, and he does it all in just 6 paragraphs?
Yeah, and it's this evil thing that has fallen, but still has left its mark on the world. That's very evocative. And then the dungeon itself, what makes it so robust compared to other sample dungeons is it's not really a collection. It's not a monster zoo, even though it kind of is. But it's not a monster zoo in the fact that it's not just slogging your way through combat. It's a lot of exploration and a lot of different environments to interact with. Because in this dungeon, you have underground rivers and a beach and a tower and rat warrens, and there's crypts and there's all these different environments within this one dungeon to interact with, and you do have to interact with them in different ways. There's places where dwarves and halflings can move freely while everyone else would have to crawl, and there's places that call out the ability of elves and dwarves to kind of have an advantage in seeing hidden things over other classes. And it's just something that kind of gives you this full D&D experience in this small little sample.
Yeah, and he also includes several monsters that are not in the monster list, which is kind of showing you that you can create your own pretty easily and just add them in the adventure. You don't have to stick to what's in the monster list.
So should we have declared spoiler alert for a book that was written in 1974? Stop now if you don't want to know what goes on in the dungeon. I like that the sample dungeon is explained in a way that I feel like even me as a non-DMer type person, I mean, I might not be as fluid or as creative or as smooth with my presentation, but I feel like even with the descriptions that are given, it would do what's intended for, is help a beginner player or beginner DM play a game with their friends and use the descriptions. And then as you get better, you could use the same map and create your own encounters within the different rooms. So I think the layout and the descriptions of the rooms is great to help you play, which whole point.
Oh, I agree. He doesn't. They're not too long either, which is great. There's not that much to read for each room, but he does a good job of setting each one up.
And it's extremely non-linear. You can really explore this dungeon. You're not kind of taken by the hand room to room, and you're dictated in the direction you're going to go. It's really a dungeon to explore.
Yeah, and you can even leave by a different exit from which you came in.
Multiple ways, I would say. I would say you could leave by the sea or by the wizard's tower.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. Really.
Yeah. Or possibly the tunnels under the cemetery.
So I was wondering, could you leave out a rat tunnel?
It
Yes,
says
because they go off the edge of the map. So it would certainly be a place you could expand.
yeah.
Assume the rats leave out of them.
Right. It says in there that you can't find your way out of them, and you would just get lost. But I think it's worth as a dungeon master expanding on that and finding something that could go that way. Certainly, that it does invite you to find further depths into this and where Zenopus met his end. Right. So that could be a place to put that easily enough.
You would most definitely need a dwarf for you to be able to forge out those tunnels.
Absolutely.
I know I've at least read portions of the sample dungeon before.
Mm-hmm.
I think my copy of Holmes might be missing it.
Oh,
This
no.
All news to me.
It's really good.
Yeah, like
Did you
I'm
get the
missing out.
clearance version? The half-price books?
I don't know. I mean, it was loose. It wasn't in box.
It was a half book.
Got a back cover though.
Well, it should be in there. Do you have an illustration of sample floor plan on page 41?
I do.
That's it. That's the sample dungeon.
Okay.
It's
Man.
good. It's good. You'll like it. I promise you. Now, Courtney pointed out something to me that was a little bit weird about the octopus.
Oh, yeah. So, the octopus only gets 6 attacks. Why wouldn't the octopus get 8 attacks per melee round?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it has to stand on 2 tentacles.
There's just interesting.
Courtney, if it attacks with all 8 hands, how is it ever going to finish this Afghan?
I guess he was giving the players a break.
Yeah.
Just 6 attacks.
It is kind of a strange
Yeah, I
number to
don't
land
think I
at.
ever noticed that before.
Yes! I taught that something.
Maybe when they were playtesting it, they took an actual octopus and was like, they saw how many attacks it could feasibly get within a 10-second period. And it was always 6.
So they punched an octopus.
Well, they got punched by an octopus.
Oh.
Are you suggesting all of the money at early TSR went into octopus research and development?
They were making a lot of money really fast, so that was probably not the dumbest thing they bought.
Maybe the octopus was busy eating the fish from the pirates?
That's a good point.
2 hands? 2 tentacles? Not 2 hands, 2 tentacles.
So it suggests that the pirates have a way of getting past the octopus, and I feel like that suggests the players would be able to as well if they learned that trick.
Or thought of it, yeah.
Yeah. And I think also, if I ran this, I think I would introduce the evil thaumaturge as a non-player character in Poor Town.
Oh, yeah.
Before introducing him later as a adversary in the dungeon. I feel like there's this kind of role play element to it. It gives you this idea of this town and what this town is like, but it doesn't really have the town fleshed out as a place that you would game in. I could really see fleshing that out and having this thaumaturge involved in their day-to-day life to some extent. It would be neat to have that villain in the dungeon that has a personal connection somehow.
Yeah, I've thought about having him be part of like a town council that also includes Lamunda's father. Another thing I thought about more recently is instead of having him attack immediately in the dungeon, instead trying to hire the players, because it says he's trying to take over the level.
Mm-hmm.
So he might hire them to help him get rid of some of the monsters on that level.
Right, and maybe under like false pretenses. Still have them be villainous, and still have them kind of double cross them at some point, or maybe present himself as maybe too evil for the players to stomach. That's a cool idea. That's a cool idea.
Because normally when I played it, it's just like, players intrude into his room. He and his henchmen like attack. Maybe he runs away up to his tower, and there's a battle up there. But I was thinking the next time I run it, I might try to play that differently.
So, Zach, is there anything about Holmes that we have not covered, or maybe has not typically been covered? I know you've been a couple times on programs to talk about Holmes Basic, including this program before. Is there anything that just has never been mentioned that you think it merits mention?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I don't think that J.R. Holmes gets credit for introducing the Cthulhu mythos to Dungeons & Dragons. Most people that are longtime D&D players know about the original deities and demigods had the Cthulhu mythos in it when it was first printed. And then after a few printings, they took that out, possibly due to copyright entanglements with Chaosium. But what most people don't know is that Holmes wrote the original draft of material that eventually formed the basis of that mythos. After he had worked on the basic set, he wrote the first draft of an article on the Lovecraftian mythos that then Rob Kuntz did some editing on, and then it was published in Dragon Magazine number 12. And when they went to work on deities and demigods, they actually used that as the basis of the chapter. There's some sentences that are almost the same in the two of them. So I think that's one thing that he doesn't really get much credit for, because when they actually published deities and demigods, they gave him an acknowledgement for help, but he didn't get an actual author credit in there.
Oh, huh. Okay.
Which I think he should have. I wrote an article that was published in a new Cthulhu zine called Beit al-Azif that was just published a few months ago. It's called The Clerical Cosmic Horror, the Brief Era of the as a Dungeons & Dragons Pantheon. Because it was, at that point it was presented as a pantheon. So you could presumably pick it for your cleric to worship if you were crazy enough. Pretty much around the time that Call of Cthulhu was published is around the same time Deities and Demigods was first published. And then just a few years later it was gone from D&D, and they never really brought it back again. They have similar monsters in D&D, but they don't have the actual, Lovecraft names of creatures and his deities.
Well, we do have an email to read before we close up the podcast, and that email is from Lao Lu. And he writes, I was interested in some of the banter you guys had about modules when talking about X2 in episode 151. I have been all over the board on modules. Like many, I went through the module haters phase where I only played games I wrote. Then, in my adult life after kids, I have found that I prefer to play modules if I have the option. Like you guys were saying, I always have to get in there and muck around, making the thing more to my tastes, but I love having the maps and stats and stuff there as a skeleton to riff on. I also really have come to enjoy talking with other gamers, with certain modules we have both experienced as a reference point of conversation. You know, the old, have you ever played Expedition to the Barrier Peaks conversation. There's something very unifying about those separate but shared experiences. The one thing I think is an interesting debate is how much is too much or too little detail for a published adventure. I was recently in the awkward position of running a D&D module I had not had a chance to read before, and it was way under-detailed. There were monsters in rooms with no rhyme or reason, no connection to the plot or effect on the surrounding map, important characters with no names, the presence of a huge band of goblins with no note on why they were there or what their goals were, and on and on. Yes, I can make things up on the spot, but without these details at least suggested, everything seems random, and random is not something worth paying for in my opinion. So what about you guys? what level of details or what types of things make a module worthwhile or skippable in your minds?
Thanks for the question, Laulu. I'm going to kick this off actually to Courtney to start. And I kind of want to get her perspective on, since I know she plays more than she DMs, of course. Courtney, have you ever had an experience he was kind of talking about where everything just seems kind of random? Like, it's like, why is there a goblin in this ice fortress? That doesn't make any sense. Or
Like,
why
is this octopus only attacking me 6 times?
Yeah. Exactly.
I don't think that's something you would bring up if you were playing.
Probably not. I don't think I've ever had a completely random situation where, yeah, like you're saying, like an ice character in a desert, or never been that bizarre or random. But if I were to run a game, I would want lots of detail, or I would want to have plenty of time to prepare in which to write out that detail so that I'm not trying on the spot of what's in this room, what's in that room. I would want to know ahead of time and be very prepared ahead of time. So I personally would not like a module that was very vague, at least not initially if I were a DM.
That's interesting. I'll have a rebuttal to that. So, real quick, just before we move on to another person, I know you. So, hey, I know Carl's like your husband and everything, and you have to be nice to him, but like, you can tell me the truth. No laughter. All right, dang.
What was the? I mean, what was the expansion of that?
But like, this is, you can tell me if Carl's bad at D&D. No, but I know.
We lost her audio again. I can hear her. We can't hear you, Courtney.
Man.
Goodness. I bet it was hilarious, too.
I know, because I know Courtney would bite onto that. Like,
I think Carl cut her off.
Can you reconnect your plug-in or something, Courtney? Oh, there you go.
Back? Am I back? Am I?
Yeah.
Okay. I said I have to be nice to him?
Well, and I know you play in a lot when you go to conventions. I'm guessing you're probably taking some time to get away from playing Carl in Carl's game. Have you ever gone to just like a terrible convention game without naming names, of course?
No, so when we went to GaryCon, I played in quite a few games that were not DM'd by Carl, and I actually had great DMs in all the games I played in. Some of them were definitely different than Carl's style of DMing, but that's fine. I still enjoyed them for various reasons. Obviously, we did recap and talked about a few of the games, but I am fortunate to be married to a good DM, because how awful would it be? So, especially seeing how we didn't start playing RPGs until after we were married. I mean, that could have been rough. But luckily, he's a great DM, and I do enjoy playing his games, and I don't necessarily have to say that, but that's my honest opinion. So, and it helps.
I want to kick it over to Zach next.
Yes, what was the question?
All right, it's a many-fold.
Essentially, the question is, what do you expect out of a module, and what are your experiences with playing modules versus home brewing?
Definitely if they're too wordy, it's just a chore to read it, and it's a chore to process what is actually the important things in the room, like when you're actually playing.
Yeah, I 100% agree. That was gonna be so Courtney had mentioned when there's not enough detail, and I think you and I are on the same page of when a module has too much detail, and it's why does anyone need this? This is dumb. Just tell me that there are 7 goblins in this room. Carl. Well, actually, Zach, anything else? Do you have any experiences, where you've been at the old local FLGS and have shared those experiences with people?
Oh yeah, I agree completely with him about the part about talking to other people. I mean, I love hearing how other people have run the sample dungeon or keep on the Borderlands.
Mm-hmm.
because I know those so well. It's it's always interesting the other takes that people have had on them. And it can give you ideas for like the next time you run it, just to hear how somebody else has played through it.
Yeah. Carl, what of you? What are your opinions?
Very similar to Lao Lu's. When I was a kid running Dungeons and Dragons, I didn't care to own a module. I didn't really. We had a couple of dungeon magazines, and I would look through those. But for the most part, I was just making up my own stuff. And it was very serialized. It was very never-ending camping trip Dungeons and Dragons. But I was not running modules or even saw the value in them because I felt like I had all of these ideas that I could pull from over and over again. And in nowadays, I really enjoy running modules, and I really enjoy reading modules and just seeing what the ideas were in the early days of Dungeons and Dragons. I think B2's a fantastic thing to look through and kind of see this. I really think B2 and modules like it are what I want from a module, where it doesn't really provide you any type of narrative construct. It only provides you with environments, because what I like to do then is add my own narrative construct to these, because I can use the environments within the narrative construct I create. And I like creating narrative constructs more than I like creating environments.
Yeah. So you said everything that I was going to say. You got almost verbatim. And I think the most enjoyable part of modules, and this is something I've discovered recently for myself, has been being like, oh, this is weird. Like, why is this here? And looking at the skeletal framework of the module, of the environments that you're provided with, and the pieces, and fitting those pieces together and really making it your own. Like, I was doing that very heavily in the X2 game, and I am gonna run that more, but man, I am super happy with a lot of the stuff I changed to make, to kind of give more of a narrative or a background with some stuff that doesn't make sense. But I think it's more interesting to go, all right, well, how can I work these random bits together and come up with something coherent? And everyone's interpretation of that is going to be unique, but when you go to a game store and talk to someone else and you find out how they did it, it's like, oh, well, next time I run it, I can change it like that.
Well, I'll use Lamunda the Lovely as an example.
Yeah.
So in a more modern product or a more detailed product, they might give you her full backstory and this full history and how to play her and who she is. And within the sample dungeon, all you know is that she's, one, a pretty tough warrior. She's level 2, presumably higher level than the party on the adventure. And she's captured by pirates for whatever reason. And she has a nobleman in her family. She's the daughter of a lord. So that's all the information you get from her. Now, you can take that so many different directions. It gives you enough information to give you an idea, but you can turn that on its head or go X, Y, or Z direction with it. She could be a rival pirate. She could have this whole secret life, that's the reason they captured her. And that's the reason she's with pirates in the first place. And I think you could assume that she is an adventurer and she is a warrior and her father, who's a lord, knows about it. Or maybe it's a secret. It just allows you all of these different directions to go that if it were more fleshed out, you would be locked into this box. Obviously, you can change it. You're not imprisoned by that. But with the absence of that detail, it sparks the imagination. And I think that's the perfect level I want a module to be at, is to give me enough detail to spark my imagination.
Yeah, I love the closed ecosystem of a lot of like TSR era modules, especially like the B series. Maybe not so much the X series, but just going, how do these pieces fit together? Like in your interpretation, she's a rival pirate. In my interpretation, when you gave me the setup, is that she's a hostage who's going to be ransomed back to the noble family.
Well, right.
Or maybe it's a prodigal son kind of thing where these pirates have captured her and are going to return her for a bounty that her father put on her for her safe return. Like, there are, that's awesome. I don't know. I think we're in sync with this.
Great ideas.
If Wizards of the Coast wrote that module, they'd give you every single detail about her life and her alignment, and it.
It's interesting you mention that, because the new coming edition adventure, Ghosts of Saltmarsh, they actually put the Tower of Zenopus into that adventure.
Oh, really?
It's going to be out next week, I think. Now, what they did is, it's not a fully fleshed out adventure site. It's Adventure Hook. They just put it on the map, and then there's like 4 paragraphs about it. They basically condensed the sample dungeon down to some suggested ideas.
Well, it kind of going with Laulu's his email last night when I was buying my copy of Into the Borderlands at the game store. The owner was like, "Oh, hey, if you're looking for the 3rd in this series, I'm getting them when they release." And I was like, "Oh, which one is it?" He's like, it's the he had to look it up, but it's Expedition to the Barrier Creeks. It's like the spaceship one. And I was like, yeah, it is the spaceship one with laser gun. And we both had that like shorthand of this is what is in this module.
Yeah, which is great. That's lost if everybody's just running their own adventures.
Mm-hmm. I do think the other benefit of the module is I think it takes infinitely less time to homebrew up all of these different customizations and modifications to something that's already a finished product than it does to write stuff whole cloth. And I'm in my 30s now, and I don't have infinite time because I have other hobbies that I like. So it was very enjoyable just over the course of a week modify an entire module.
Yeah, or make a sandbox by taking bits and pieces from different adventures.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think that's going to be our show for this week. Thank you again, Zach, for being on the show. Where can we find your blog?
Oh, it's simple. It's Zenopus Archives at blogspot.com.
All right. Again, I've been Crispy, and unfortunately, the party passed their surprise roll with a 5, so they found me out as I was going to attack them, and I've been killed, and they've taken all of my magical armor.
And I am Carl. I've been Lamunda, and I have been secretly a pirate this whole time.
I'm Courtney, and I'm a unicorn constantly feeding the black pudding to keep it from being angry.
And I am Zenopus, and I have now been engulfed in green flame and destroyed.
No!
Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you so much for being
Thanks for being on the show.
It was my pleasure.
Courtney, you want to say the line?
Oh yeah, peace out, Cub Scout.
I forgot. Awesome.
Are you enjoying the show you're listening to right now? Great! Why not head over to patreon.com/WGP and support that show for as little as $1 a month. $1 a month goes a long way to helping support the network of Wild Games Productions. Again, that's patreon.com/WGP. Thank you. Do you like the Marvel comics and movies? Do you enjoy role-playing games? Why not check out the classic Phase Rip podcast, where they dedicate time to going over the rules and the fun of the Phase Rip system by TSR from the 80s. Marvel superheroes at its finest. Listen in live bi-weekly on youtube.com/TheEvilDM or catch the audiocast at classicphaserip.com for all your Marvel superhero needs. Excelsior!
So, you like AD&D 2nd Edition but no podcast to listen to?
Guess what?
We got the cure right here.
I got a fever. And the only prescription is
The Thaco's Hammer Podcast.
You want me to put the hammer down?
Join DMs Glenn, Brian, Corey, and Full On Gamer as they discuss, debate, and review the world of 2nd Edition AD.
Yes.
Go here.
Give me a gin.
Yeah, that's DM Corey ordering drinks.
Sorry, girlfriend's getting gin.
Rules, modules, supplements, clones, everything 2E is fair game.
Someone lied to you, and there's an opposed roll, and they won, so you believe the lie. I know, but I don't, because I, the player, know that they lied to me. But you, the character, have to act like you take the lie.
So listen into a podcast where number 2 is number 1. The Thaco's Hammer Podcast, the best damn 2nd edition AD&D podcast ever. You'll find it on iTunes or at thacoshammer.info.
Leothward and Hilda are standing in the ruins of a once great tower. Its walls now crumbled, bricks strewn across the ground. There is an entryway leading down a stairwell. They are with a group of mercenaries that they have come to know as the Red Shields. They're led by Cooper, and also among their number is Jan, who has been the drinking buddy of Leothward and Hilda, and Brother Bowen, who appears to be a follower of the immortal Ringo, and Eric, who is young and excited to be here.
Ugh, Eric. That guy.
Eric, lead the way.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, I can go down there. I'll go down the stairs. And Cooper says, wait, I'll go first. Dwarf, elf, would one of you want to come with me? I could use the dark vision.
I think I might have torches. I don't have any torches because I can see in the dark.
No, I have torches, but I don't want to light them just yet. If one of you can come with me.
I'll go.
Okay. So, Hilda and Cooper start walking down the stairs. It's really dark down here. The light gets cut off pretty quickly from the small opening that you are traversing down. And it suddenly gets very dark. And Cooper is now relying on Hilda to kind of help him walk forward. Hilda, in the dark, you see a hallway. And that hallway goes forward outside of your dark vision, but you can see about halfway down how far you can see. It splits into a northern quarter and a southern quarter. So you're essentially going to be at a 4-way intersection if you keep moving forward.
Did I hear anything coming from any particular direction? Is everybody else right behind us and we're just in front, or are we the only two down here?
Right now, the rest of the people are at the top of the stairs waiting to hear from you, and you do not hear anything.
Okay. I give them the signal to follow. Caw.
Okay. Eric says, I heard it! Let's go!
The sound of lyre music grows stronger as we approach.
Is it soft music?
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know.
Ooh, I like this one.
Eric starts humming along.
I stop playing for a second and give him a dirty look.
Cooper goes, keep it down, keep it down.
I start strumming even softer.
No, I mean stop. I mean quit. I mean stop doing it.
No appreciation for art. And then I put it away.
Are you actually playing? Like,
yeah.
That's great. I thought you were throwing in sound bites. I was like, wow, he's really prepared.
That's awesome, though. So that's a ukulele, right?
No, it's a mandolin.
Oh, it's a mandolin. Okay, close enough. Close enough.
I prefer, at this point of our adventure, that you play a little, like, traveling music more. We're still exploring these dungeons.
Yes, more campground traveling music and less dungeon murder music.
Look the chords for Kumbaya.
No, I mean, don't play music in dungeons. Play music at the campground.
Oh.
No, I meant more like, we're just going through, as far as we know, we're just going through a hallway right now. So I need, like, music as if we're just walking and not, like, It got energetic, I guess, there.
I don't think you understand how much danger we're in right now. Playing music is a bad choice.
Oh. Shh.
Jan says, that's a good point. You should play something scary. Oh, good. Creepy music?
Okay, so for real, so I don't hear anything from either side.
So at this point, Cooper says, Hilda, do you think it'd be okay to light a torch? And as far as you can tell from what you can see, yeah, it'd be fine. I mean, there's nothing immediately like on the precipice of your vision that would like come running after you or anything.
Yeah, we could do that.
Cooper looks back to Eric and he says, hey, light a torch. And Eric lights a torch and he is standing in the middle of you. And Crispy, where's Leothward? Is he going to be in the middle as well?
Yeah, I was thinking probably middle or middle back.
Okay, and that puts
Depending on how many ranks we have.
Well, you're going to have 3. So,
Just 3, okay.
So you're going to be in the middle with Eric, and then Brother Bowen and Jan will be in the back.
I just think it's funny that Luthor gets to travel with Eric.
So, there is a corridor going forward, about halfway, about 15 feet from where you're standing. It goes both north and south in a 4-way intersection.
I say we keep going straight.
Okay. You walk up to the intersection. You can look down both north and south corridors, and they both go out of your torchlight range.
We should go left.
Does Cooper know anything about this dungeon whatsoever? Any folk stories or...
I've never heard of Zenopus before.
Zenopus is an evil wizard, a dark mage. There were sightings of dangerous magic and ghoulish creatures dancing around his tower before it was destroyed. I can only assume there will be ghoulish creatures and dangerous magic in this dungeon, but I imagine there will also be gold. I imagine there will also be some magic. That's all I know.
Well, I vote we go straight ahead, but does anybody else have an opinion?
I heard once, long ago, that you should always go to the left.
To the left, you say?
Mm-hmm.
To the left?
Yes. Everything we want is in the room to the left. In this dungeon, that's our stuff.
Okay. I'm fine with left.
If I claimed it, please don't touch.
This must be some sort of elven lore, says Eric.
Yes, It's obvious that you must not know about me. He must not know about me.
I don't. I've never met an elf. I've said that already.
Eric, if you don't listen up, I get like real close to his face. I could have another you in a minute. Matter of fact, he'll be here in a minute.
That seems fair.
Now, to the left.
All right. Everybody's fine with going to the left, which would be the southern quarter. You traverse down that quarter about 60 feet. Then on the edge of your torchlight, you see that it does open up into a large chamber. As you approach the chamber, you see it is a 50-foot by 50-foot room. The door you're standing in heads north, but there is also an open archway that heads south. It is not directly across from you. It is a little bit further east, heading south. And inside this room, there are 4. You're not sure if they're doorways or inset bookshelves or what, because they are covered in cobwebs. There's a way for cobwebs to be strewn over them. You don't know if they're just insets or if they are actually doors out of the room, but they're absolutely covered in cobwebs. The room is covered with just like a large layer of just undisturbed dust all over the floor, like an inch high of dust. But other than that, the room looks empty. So there is dust all over the floor, and there are 4 cobweb-covered areas on the wall. 2 on your right and 2 on your left. And And so the door that you're standing in is behind you. The other door is in front of you, but you have to cross the room to get to it.
I want to check out the cobweb cubby holes to the right of us.
Okay. That would be the closest one to you. What do you want to check out? You see cobwebs covering over something, whether it's a doorway out or a bookshelf or something, you don't know. How do you want to approach it?
I will. I'm not going to touch the cobwebs, but I will take like the hilt of my sword and see if I can brush them away.
Okay. So you have your great sword out and you slide it towards the cobwebs and push them out of the way a little bit. Behind those cobwebs, you see the grinning skull of a human skeleton.
Under the cobwebs or beside the cobwebs?
Like behind them. Like the cobwebs are covering a doorway and it's resting behind it in this niche.
Okay, so it is a cubby then.
Yes, that's what it appears to be, yes. There does not appear to be anything behind it other than stone wall and a skeleton.
Is there anything remarkable about the skeleton?
No.
I'm going to wave Eric over to me to bring the light closer.
Eric stands by you with his light.
With the area illuminated more, can I make out any more details?
It appears to be a unremarkable skeleton. Obviously, it had some purpose of being placed on this wall like this, but that purpose is unknown at this time.
Is it sitting on like a chair or a throne or like a stone cutout?
It is standing.
Still standing.
It is standing as if it were able to just stand on its own right there behind the cobwebs.
I'm going to punch the skeleton in the face.
Okay. So you, with your fist, rear back and punch at the skeleton.
Mm-hmm.
It's a skull. You punch it.
Like it stays intact?
Yeah.
Like it doesn't crumble to the ground?
No, it's not. I mean, it's a skull.
Its head doesn't fall off?
No, it doesn't fall off.
Is there anything strewn around the area? Is it like fairly, not like clean, but free of debris?
No, it's dust.
Cluttered.
There's nothing in here except dust and cobwebs, and the dust is covering the floor.
The skeleton doesn't do anything.
No, you punch it. It is. I mean, it is. Something is going. Like, there's no reason this skeleton should be able to stand on its own into this archway. Period. Like, it's not like held up by ropes or like on a stand. It is literally standing there. So some magic is at work to some extent here.
And it's not like the spider web's holding it up.
Right.
I'm going to call back to the rest of the team that nobody move forward.
Okay.
I'm going to go over to the next cubby hole and wave away Actually, I'm going to grab the torch from Eric and burn the cobwebs away.
On the one you're at?
On the one beside it, the other.
Okay, so you're going further into the room?
Oh, I thought they were right next to each other.
No, and I want to make that clear that you're going to be walking almost all the way across the room to do that.
Well, then I don't want to do that. What I want to do instead is, so I don't grab the torch. I yell to the team, nobody go any further.
Okay.
And then I'm going to grab the skeleton by like its like collarbones, and I'm going to try to drag it out in the middle of the floor.
All right, you are unable to.
I will call over. I'll call over Brother Bowen.
Okay.
And tell him to walk where I walked.
Okay, he does.
And then I'm gonna.
I mean, you can't even see the floor. There's so much dust. But
I imagine my footprints.
Right. Exactly what I'm saying. Like he can see exactly what steps you took, and he takes those same steps. And where you've both stepped now, you can see the gray stone floor underneath it.
Okay, I'm going to just gesticulate to the skeleton, and then I'll hold up a hand, like a finger, like that, and wait. There's more, and I'm gonna punch the skeleton again. I'm gonna try to like give it a right hook so the head would definitely come off.
Okay, so are you doing some wrestling moves here? Is that
No. I'm throwing a right hook. Like I'm throwing a punch that would like knock a skeleton if it was just a regular skeleton. Knock the head off.
Okay, it doesn't.
Just to demonstrate, like, hey, looky here.
Okay, so you're showing Brother Bowen, like, magics be magicking.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you can't move it. You can't pull it, push it forward. You do punch it. You hit it with your hand, and it does not react kinetically at all.
And then I'm going to go... Now, I haven't been in very many dungeons before, but everyone, please ready your weapons.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, they all pull their weapons out.
And then once I know everyone's ready, I'm going to also draw my sword.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to then walk further into the room.
Okay. Right.
Can I?
Yeah.
I would like to check to see if I notice any difference in the stonework.
It's hard to tell with all the dust around. So, I mean, like, the stone on the walls, you can kind of see for the most part, but there's so much dust on the floor, you can't really see very well because of the dust.
Is this like metallic particles, or is this like your standard house dust?
It looks like any dust you've ever seen.
Excess.
Yeah.
Okay.
It looks like the dust you would see on a ceiling fan in someone's house. Someone else's, not ours. Not our house. Maybe. But, yeah, I mean, that kind of just layered up nastiness.
So we see 4 skeletons behind webs, one that's been punched a few times, and a whole bunch of dust on the floor, and...
Yeah, and you can see where the footprints have traversed between where Crispy and then Eric and then Brother Bowen have all walked into the room. You can see the gray stone underneath their footprints, but that's all you see currently.
Yeah, I'm gonna move over to the next cubby, like on this right-hand wall.
Do we have any way to clear out the dust? I mean, I know we don't want to, like, dust one spot at a time, but should we clear this dust out enough to see if there's anything obvious, I guess. I feel like just going 1 square at a time is pretty... I mean, I guess we could tap with our 10-foot pole in front of us.
No, you can clear out the dust even if you just use, like, a large sack and kind of push away the dust in front of you or whatever, just kind of using it like you would, like, a towel. So if you want to move the dust, I'm not going to stop you from doing that.
I mean, I guess I feel like unless we're just going to gamble and take a few steps at a time, then it makes more sense to clear out the dust a little bit.
How does Leah Thward feel about that?
Well, I was trying to illustrate to everyone, like, hey, these skeletons, some shenanigans are going to happen.
Right. That's definitely going to happen. So do you want to clear out the dust instead?
No.
Well, I have my axe ready.
Okay, so you're saying don't clear the dust, just walk forward.
Clear the dust off, like, the floor?
Yeah.
This is like a huge room, though, isn't it? You said it's 50 by 50.
Yeah, you would have to, like, clear as you go.
Right. I mean, I guess the mechanism's not going to be that obvious, but I guess I feel like as a dwarf, I should notice a difference in the stonework. If there's a mechanism to cause these skeletons to come to life. I mean, we can gamble. I always like a good fight.
I just figured it was all magic stuff. Like, maybe there's a sigil on the floor, but...
It's up to you. Crispy, Leah Thward can walk across the room to the other area, or you can move the dust around and see if that informs your decision.
So I don't have anything on me except I have armor, weapon, and that's it. I have some rope and my backpack.
Well, I mean, somebody has a large sack or something they could use. I mean, it's up to you. You can move the dust if you want. You don't have to.
Does anyone in the party have a 10-foot pole?
Yeah, Jan has a 10-foot pole.
I mean, I guess it wouldn't hurt to take the 10-foot pole and, like, sweep in front of me.
Okay. Everybody cool with that?
I think that's a better idea than just...
Okay. So, Jan throws a leather sack on his 10-foot pole, and he puts it on the floor and starts mopping the floor, essentially. Dust mop. Mm-hmm. improvised dust mop where you're about to walk, and he mops a little bit of the floor and you see gray stone, and you take a step and he mops a little bit of floor and you see gray stone. Everything looks normal. Hilda looks like normal stonework, and you take a step and he mops a little bit more and you see red stonework.
Is it the actual stone itself, or is it like writing, like a sigil?
it is the stone itself, as if it were a pattern that you've not fully uncovered.
Okay. Let's try to sweep ahead of us as far as we can.
All right. He mops and dust mops a little bit more, and you see where the red stonework is. It eventually stops and squares off, and there is gray stonework to its side.
To its side.
Right.
Are we able to like clear a path?
Yep.
To lead to.
Yes. He dust mops the entire floor, and you clear a path to other side of the room while finding a path through that does not lead to any red stone, but only gray stone.
Is that leading towards that arch in the opposite side?
Yep, it leads to the southern doorway.
Okay. Well, then I guess we take that path.
All right.
And then I'll have everyone else take that path as well.
All right. They all follow along the uncovered gray stone, avoiding the red stone, and you make it through to the other side. And we will stop here and pick back up on the next adventure.
Okay.
What?
So join us next time on the Save or Die actual play as Leah Thwart and Hilda delve deeper into the dungeons of Zenopus.
The Save or Die podcast is a production of Wild Games Production, and it's produced for entertainment purposes only. The music used in the intro and outro is by Tripod and used with permission. Be sure to visit the Save or Die crew at saveordie.info for more information. If you'd like to support this podcast, please go to patreon.com/WGP.